You come home and the dog isn't at the door. That's the first thing people notice. Not a sound, not movement, just the absence of the thing that was always there. And for a moment, your brain doesn't process it as grief. It processes it as wrong. Now imagine that dog was yours, and you were the one who didn't come home. Most of us have thought about losing our dog. We brace ourselves for it quietly, in the back of our minds, hoping it stays far away. But almost no one stops to ask the harder question, the one that sits just underneath that thought. What does your dog feel when they lose you? Not the physical moment, not the day, but the days after, the weeks, the slow accumulation of a silence where you used to be. We assume we know the answer. We picture loyalty. We picture waiting. Most of us have heard some version of the story. The dog who returned to the same spot for years, or sat at the grave, or waited at the station long after the train stopped meaning anything. We treat these stories like folklore about devotion. Beautiful, simple, not needing explanation. But that's not the whole story. Not even close. Because what actually happens inside a dog's brain and body when their primary person disappears is not just emotional, it is neurological, it is physiological, and in ways that researchers are only beginning to map, it may be one of the most layered grief responses observed in any non-human species. Here's where most people get it wrong. When we picture a grieving dog, we imagine sadness. A dog that eats less, sleeps more, seems a little flat for a while. We project our own emotional vocabulary onto the experience and assume the dog is moving through something roughly similar to what we'd feel. Just quieter, shorter, less complex. The research says otherwise, because a dog doesn't simply miss a person. They lose a biological system they were synchronized with. Let that settle for a moment. Dr. Gregory Burns, a neuroscientist at Emory University, spent years doing something no one had seriously attempted before, scanning the living, conscious brains of dogs using fMRI technology. He trained dogs to lie still inside MRI machines so he could observe what actually fires in a dog's brain during real experience. What he found shifted the scientific conversation entirely. When dogs were exposed to the scent of their primary owner, the caudate nucleus, the brain region most consistently associated with anticipation of reward and positive emotional experience, activated more powerfully than it did for any other stimulus in the study. Not food, not other dogs, not toys or play. Their person's scent produced the single strongest reward response across the entire experiment. What this means is not metaphorical. You are neurologically encoded in your dog's brain as their most significant source of safety and reward. You are written into their chemistry, not because they chose you on some conscious level, but because the architecture of their brain built itself around your presence over time. And when that presence disappears permanently, that encoded signal doesn't simply go quiet. It keeps firing. Over and over, met with nothing. But here's where it gets interesting. Dogs do not understand death the way humans do. In 2021, philosopher Susanna Monceau proposed that dogs likely hold what she termed a minimal concept of death, a functional awareness that something has fundamentally and irreversibly changed, without the abstract cognitive machinery to understand what that change means. They don't comprehend finality. They don't have a framework for forever. What they have is a nervous system trained to expect a specific signal, your footstep, your scent, your voice at a particular time of day, and the slow, disorienting experience of that signal never arriving. This difference matters more than it might seem. Researchers at the University of Milan documented 86 dogs over the months following the death of their primary owner. The behavioral patterns they recorded were striking in their consistency. Dogs returning repeatedly to the owner's chair. Dogs waiting at the front door at the exact time the owner used to arrive home, sometimes for weeks. Dogs refusing food from certain dishes, or lying in the owner's clothing, or moving through the house as if conducting a search they couldn't stop. Not because these dogs understood death, but because their nervous system was continuing to run a program that life had interrupted without warning or explanation. And the science gets stranger, because this isn't only behavioral, it reaches into the body itself. In 2019, a research team led by Lena Roth at Linköping University in Sweden published findings that fundamentally changed how scientists think about the dog-human relationship. They found that long-term dog-owner pairs showed measurable synchronization of cortisol levels, the hormone most directly tied to the body's experience of stress and calm. Over months of shared life, the dog's stress rhythms had begun to mirror the owner's, not through training, not consciously, biologically, gradually, built from proximity, routine, and tens of thousands of small shared moments. This means that a dog living closely with a person doesn't simply form a preference for that person. Their stress response system quietly calibrates itself to another living being's biology. What's happening is so much deeper than missing someone. When a primary person dies, the dog's nervous system, which has been co-regulating with another body for years, is suddenly regulating alone. The cortisol synchrony breaks, the biological anchor disappears. The dog's system is not just sad, it is, in a measurable physiological sense, destabilized. And that destabilization shows up in appetite, in sleep architecture, in immune response, and in behavior patterns that can persist far longer than most people expect. Understanding this requires one more layer of context, the evolutionary one. Dogs were not domesticated as tools or working animals first. The growing scientific consensus, supported by geneticists like Adam Boyko at Cornell University, suggests that dogs have been living in continuous close proximity to humans for somewhere between 15,000 and 40,000 years. Not merely nearby, with them, sleeping beside them, reading their emotional cues as a survival mechanism across hundreds of generations. Over that span of time, the dog's brain didn't just adapt to tolerate human presence, it adapted to depend on it. The capacity to read human faces, to respond to human vocal tone, to co-regulate with a human nervous system, these aren't learned tricks, they are evolutionary features, selected for over millennia, because the dogs who bonded most effectively with humans survived best. Which means the bond between a dog and their primary person isn't preference or habit. It is the product of an ancient biological architecture that was built over an almost incomprehensible stretch of time, specifically for this relationship. And when that relationship ends abruptly, the loss isn't social, it is structural. But here's something the research uncovered that almost no one talks about. The depth of the grief response across the Milan study and several subsequent observational analyses wasn't random. It didn't correlate with the dog's breed or age or how long the owner had been unwell. It correlated with integration. The dogs who grieved most visibly and for longest were not the ones who had been kept separately, walked on schedule, and left to sleep alone. They were the ones who had been most woven into the fabric of someone's daily life. The ones who traveled in the car, slept in the same room, spent unstructured time in close physical contact, heard the same voice at the same hours every day. The grief was a direct measure of the bond, not separate from it, a reflection of it. And Harvard neuroscience adds the final piece. Researchers at Harvard and Massachusetts General Hospital scanned the brains of mothers, viewing photos of their children, then photos of their dogs. The core attachment circuits, the amygdala, the orbitofrontal cortex, activated in both cases at comparable intensity. The brain's bonding architecture does not filter by species, it responds to the bond itself, which means the attachment your dog carries for you is not a lesser version of love. It is the same circuit, running the same signal in a different brain. Now here's the part you need to hear carefully, especially if you live with a dog who has recently lost someone. There is a difference between a dog moving through grief and a dog whose nervous system is in genuine crisis. Normal grief adjustment looks like reduced appetite, increased sleeping, temporary withdrawal, and searching behavior that gradually decreases over weeks. These are hard to watch, but they are the system doing what it should. What requires intervention looks different. A dog that stops eating entirely for more than 48 hours. A dog that becomes unresponsive to everything, their name, familiar sounds, physical touch they previously sought out. A dog showing what behavioral scientists call learned helplessness, extended motionless lying, indifference to discomfort, complete withdrawal from the environment. These signals mean the grief has moved beyond emotional processing into physiological shutdown, and they need veterinary attention, not because grief is wrong, but because a nervous system in that state cannot regulate itself back to baseline without support. Most dogs, given consistent presence, maintained routine, and gradual re-engagement, find their way through it. The waiting at the door becomes less frequent. The searching slows. A new anchor begins to form. But they don't erase you. Research by Claudia Fugazza at Eötvös-Loránd University, using a method called Do As I Do to test long-term episodic memory in dogs, confirmed that dogs retain detailed memories of specific individuals and events for years. The neurological portrait encoded in a dog's reward circuitry doesn't disappear when the person does. It persists, unanswered, but intact. So here is what all of it means. When you lay every piece of the research side by side, your dog does not understand that you will die. They do not lie awake dreading it. They do not carry the weight of that knowledge the way you sometimes do. What they carry instead is something that every brain scan and every hormone study and every behavioral record confirms. A detailed, neurologically embedded portrait of you, stored in the part of their brain built for reward and safety, activated by your scent, your voice, the rhythm of your footsteps on the floor. An image of you that was built not in one dramatic moment, but in thousands of ordinary ones. The walks, the mornings, the evenings on the couch, the sound of your voice saying their name. You are not simply someone they love. You are their primary experience of safety in the world. Written into their biology, reinforced every single day you are present. The life you are building with them right now is not just time passing. It is the welfare history that veterinary scientists use to evaluate whether an animal lived well. Every consistent moment of your presence contributes to that record. Not because every day needs to be perfect, but because the cumulative weight of your attention, your routine, your physical nearness, that is what the research identifies as the foundation of a good life for a dog. You gave them that. You are still giving them that. And if you're watching this while carrying grief of your own, if it's already happened, and you're still holding the weight of it, then hear this. What you are feeling is not disproportionate. It is not weakness. A 2016 study published in PLOS One found that 7.5% of people who lost a pet met the full clinical criteria for prolonged grief disorder. A national survey found that 75% began grieving before the animal had even passed. And more than half hid how they were truly feeling because they didn't believe the people around them would understand. Psychologists call this disenfranchised grief. The pain society tells you isn't valid, but the brain doesn't follow those rules. The attachment circuits that lit up in those Harvard scans don't check whether the bond was with a human or a dog. They respond to the bond. And when it breaks, the cost is real. Neurologically, biologically, completely real. That cost is proportional to what the bond was worth. Which means the grief you're carrying is not a sign that something went wrong. It's evidence of everything that went right. If this video reached you at the right moment, leave a comment. I read everyone. And if you want to understand your dog's final days more deeply and what the science says about your presence in those last moments, that video is next. I'll see you there.